Hi, everybody. This is Sister Liz. Sister Elizabeth is in holy retreat for 8 days of silence with the Lord. We do it every year, so we'll keep this short. We have a great interview. This will be part one of Matthew Carter from DePaul International. Enjoy it. Hi, everyone. This is Sister Elizabeth, and you are listening to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity. And I am delighted today to have as my guest Matthew Carter. I've known Matthew for a little bit of time. He's currently the Group CEO of Depaul International. And some of you have been longtime listeners. You may remember way back in 2019, we interviewed Mark McGreevy, who at the time was the group leader of the International DePaul program in group. And today we're meeting with the new CEO of the group, Matthew Carter. He came into DePaul International in 2021, but prior to that, he had quite a history in the nonprofit sector around the world. And Matthew, we're so excited to have you with us here today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, Matthew and I have had a few events happening with DePaul USA, and we'll get to some of those things. But Matthew, tell us about yourself. Tell us, you have a long history prior to DePaul International, and when we hear you talk about it, I'm sure we'll see why DePaul International made a very wise choice in bringing you on as the group CEO. So tell us about Matthew Carter, the international nonprofit worker who's been around the world.
Yes, I certainly have, and I feel incredibly privileged. I come from a family of 5 boys, and we're all very close. I'm the middle one, and I'm sort of a very academic family, and I was a bit of the black sheep when I was younger, and I decided to do things differently. So I left school and trained actually as a marine engineer, which I loved. And I visited my brother in my early years, who was a VSO, or like a Peace Corps in Indonesia, who was working at a Catholic university in Yogyakarta. And I visited him. I'd never been outside the UK. And so I was blown away by Indonesia's beauty and its vibrancy, and just everything was new. It was just extraordinary. And I visited my brother, and who I'm particularly close to, and I went back it's the second year, I went back again. And then I wrote to VSO and I said, I know you take English teachers, which my brother was, but do you take engineers? And I think my memory of this is I got a phone call the next day, said, we need more engineers than we need English teachers. And that was really the start of my career, because I then went to work in West Africa as a water engineer working for VSO. I'm seconded to United Nations, UNICEF, it's a children's program, and to the Gambian government. And I worked with very rural, isolated communities in the Gambia in water provision. And I think one of my opening memories of my career was I was asked to do a survey of water supply in a very rural part of the Gambia. Gambia is quite a small country. And it meant working with women's groups and listening and understanding their needs. And I think it was one of the most privileged moments of my career, because it was sitting down and speaking to people and understanding the issues of women's safety, where they needed water, why they needed water, how they brought water back to the house. And it sort of opened up my understanding of community needs and family needs and individuals' needs in a very stark and uplifting way. And that has always stayed with me, those memories of going into villages that have been without water, perhaps for 6 weeks, and mainly the women and young children that were carrying water every day, five miles or more, to bring water into that community. And me very quickly, being an engineer, fixing that water pump that they hadn't had water from for 6 weeks. And just the sheer joy, I remember it as if it was yesterday, of water sort of pouring out of the pump after I'd fixed it, and just this jubilation and this excitement, and a party ensued. I couldn't just get on my motorbike and go back. I had to stay that evening, and there was partying, there was food, these sort of things we take take for granted. And that paved those early memories paved my way into my international career, where I went on to work for a number of organizations, mainly the International Committee of the Red Cross, where I worked for many years and as you know, with the International Committee of the Red Cross, they're the holders of the Geneva Convention. So most of the countries they work in are countries at war or in war and conflict. So I worked through the early 90s and mid 90s in Bosnia during the war there, Somalia, Sudan, Mozambique. Again, continued to work as an engineer, and really tough work during the famine of the early 90s in Somalia, where hundreds of thousands of people were dying, and with a raging war as well. But extraordinary people I worked alongside, people who supported me, and I learned from them. And I've always said, people said, "Oh, wow, you've had an amazing career," but I think I've had an amazingly privileged career because I've learned so much from other people and met some of wonderful people who've had everything taken away from them, and they have such great optimism. And also, you realize you need very little in life, really. You need food, and you need shelter, and you need to be supported, and safety and security. When those things are in place, you think for nothing more, really. And that's why it sort of we'll come to later. My work in homelessness has become such an important part of my life. But those early years of really being on the front line and seeing and witnessing such awful suffering has shaped my life. But also working with communities that have come out of conflict as well has been an uplifting experience in itself. And then moving on from them, I worked in Congo just after the genocide with my wife there. She was the medical coordinator, and I was the country coordinator for an Irish agency called Concern. And it was when I came back from that period when I felt really shaken to the core about what was I going to do next and how was I going to look after myself, I suppose, at that time, because I witnessed so much suffering over the last 7, 8 years, and still felt tremendously committed. And I saw a job being advertised in the UK working for Caritas with the Catholic Church. It was the National Caritas in the UK. They were looking for a manager to come in to look at developing their emergency work. And that was my move into working for Caritas. I worked for Caritas for 25 years, extraordinary and amazing time. And then more recently, I joined Depaul. But my time at Caritas was, we built an immense program of support around the world, working in collaboration with the church worldwide, working with National Caritas, Diocesan Caritas. And it was such a privileged part of my career. And advising the Vatican on issues of humanitarian assistance, advising the UK government. I was traveling far and wide. And when people have said to me, where have you worked? Often when I'm going to have a vaccination for something, they say, can you list the countries you've worked in? And I sometimes say, well, sadly, most of the countries you can think of where there's been conflict or where there's been a disaster. But I've been privileged to work across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific, places like Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, which are extraordinary places, and then places closer to home, like in Eastern Europe. But Syria, Afghanistan, Kenya, Sudan, Zimbabwe, wherever. But I've met the most incredible people, and it's been a real driving influence within everything that I've done.
It's amazing listening to all the places that you've been, all the work that you've done. And for our listeners who can't see Matthew, you might think he's like, a 90-year-old guy having done all of this. When he says he's worked at Caritas for 25 years, I'm thinking he must have been about 10 when you first started your work. So it's very impressive, but it really helps us to see that when we have a committed life, when we've committed ourselves to something, the years fly by very quickly. But I can tell from having spent time with you through DePaul International that, as you say, it's a privileged life, but you're not a man of privilege. You're a man who's very simple, and I think helps us to see that, you started with your story about Gambia and water, and saying, how precious water is, and that story about the party at the end. I mean, you can get the emotion of what this must have been like, the first pumping of this water and it gushing out, and the jubilation. It's like something out of Hollywood, but not Hollywood, right? Not
Yeah, yeah,
not
no, very
not
much so.
that. But you also, for all of that work, and this again for American audiences, you're going to need a little explaining of this. You have been awarded the OBE, which is the Office of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. And you can imagine, for American folks, this is very intriguing. What's that all about? Like, we love the British Empire, anything that has to do with these kind of more ancient and more awards of honor that are awarded in any country is really important. So tell us a little bit about that in all of your humility, because I know that you are a humble guy. Um,
Well, it is, you feel slightly embarrassed when these things happen, but you know nothing about these awards until you actually get the phone call or you get the email. You don't apply yourself. It's applied for you. You're recognized by others around you, or you're recognized by a particular director or person you've worked with and alongside. And the first thing I knew was an email, probably just coming out of just after COVID, that period. And it was an email from the UK Foreign Office. And I thought I passed it by initially because I thought it was an email about a piece of work we were working and receiving funding from the UK government on. And then I opened it up and I just was slightly staggered that you've been awarded this and you have to fill in a form immediately to say you accept it. You're sworn to utmost secrecy. You cannot tell anybody at all until about a week before it goes live, and then it's released to the press. So it's all this veil of secrecy. And subsequently, I've asked other people, a couple of other people who've been received awards, and they said it does work under this strict sort of system of secrecy, not secrecy really, but just confidentiality. Um, and it, and then you go to. I went to Windsor Castle, and I took my family, so my wife and my two children, and I think that's the most wonderful bit of the whole award, really, because I was there in this beautiful room in the middle of Windsor Castle with Princess Anne, who gave me the award that day. We had 10 minutes to talk or so. It was just a small group of us who came in individually. My family stood in the background as this happened, and it was extraordinary. And this was for my work to humanitarian service over many years. Um, and the award is a beautiful cross and worn as a medal. I mean, you never wear it, but it's beautiful. I think one of the things that I feel immensely privileged by, apart from the award, is that when the award is applied for you on or people nominate you, the Foreign Office write back, as it was for me, the Foreign Office, because it was an international award, not domestic. They then write back and say we need references, or we need people to submit their views on this as a good candidacy. And because as I received the award, I was moving from Caritas into DePaul. Um, those letters were all held, and normally they'll just they get lost in the process or they get put into an archive. But because I was leaving, the director of Caritas at that time had this booklet of letters, and he gave them to me. And that, for me, was one of the most beautiful things out of the whole war, because there were letters from people I'd worked alongside in Africa, in the Middle East, in the United Nations, in the Red Cross, in the UK government, in small NGOs, large NGOs. And they weren't just saying, this is Matthew, great, he should get this award. It was pages of stories I'd forgotten, of working alongside people in Sudan and Eritrea and Ethiopia, and it was just mind blowing. And I've shared these with my children, obviously, they're young adults now, but it's a really lovely memory to hold on to, and I feel immensely privileged and slightly embarrassed as well that I've got this award, because what I gave was a drop in the ocean compared to what people in extreme poverty and suffering and war go through.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the humility part. I know you to be a humble guy. I would think too, though, you can see through. I'm sure that these letters are not all about you, right? They're about you in relation to other people. The stories about the impact made through the organizations you worked with, and how that impacted individual people, whole communities. It's an astounding life that you've lived, and yet you continue to see it as one in which you see those who have had so little now have a little more, have more than they had before. And these are basic rights. We're not talking about creating worlds of abundant wealth. We're just talking about bringing people into a place where they can care
Absolutely.
for
Yeah.
themselves. And so that's a beautiful legacy of care and not just of nonprofit work. Sometimes we can just say, well, he's always worked in the nonprofit sector. It sounds so business-like, but this is really recognizing that one person connecting themselves with other people in this kind of work can change the lives of people, which in and of itself, in small ways, changes the world. And that's an amazing thing. And so you bring all of that experience to DePaul International. So tell us how that happened. Like how does DePaul International kind of show up on your radar? And what's that process for you moving from, as you've said, some really desperately poor, underprivileged places to the work of homelessness around the world? And certainly, as an international organization, DePaul sees homelessness in very different ways. Living in the United States, I realize our homelessness looks different than homelessness may look in war-torn Ukraine at this point, where DePaul International has a work. How does Matthew Carter bring himself to this work, and then bring us into the scope of homelessness as you see it today? It's a big question, but
Yeah. No, it's I think it goes back again to that privilege of when I've worked across the world and globally, of working alongside people of all ethnicities and faiths, and also deep respect for people of different faith as well, and how there was respect back as well. There weren't those awful, violent divides as we sadly see in the world today. And I think that at that early stage, I felt in my heart that I wanted to stay committed to that work of charitable work, but also bringing a professionalism and skills that were sewn into my sort of DNA from training early as an engineer and where I am now. Um, there was a point in my career what I came back from Bosnia, and I'd had a really difficult time. I think that's what's important, is honesty. I'm not. it goes somewhere when you're witnessing suffering and or when you do a job like this, or whether you work in a hospital or in a school, people do an incredible job. Not saying that I did an incredible job, but I got tired at one point and I went up and stayed with a great friend of mine who's a Franciscan in Glasgow, and he ran an a day centre for young teenagers who were really struggling with issues of addiction and substance abuse and 3 generations of unemployment. And it was a really tough estate. And I remember my parents saying, "Why are you going from Bosnia to this really tough estate in Glasgow?" I said, "Because I need to be near Brother Ben. I just need to listen. I need to be in a space." And what was fascinating was all these lads and lasses came into the centre each day and they talked to me and they wanted to hear my stories and they wanted to tell their stories. And I was fascinated and moved and overwhelmed by what they'd gone through and living in real poverty. And they were fascinated in me telling my stories and they debriefed me, which is what I've been yearning to do. It's quite often, as you know, when you come back from abroad, people go, "Oh, how did it go?" And they listen for 2 minutes and then they drift away. And these young people living in such hard times in a part of Glasgow that was really tough wanted to listen to my stories, and I wanted to listen to them. And I made this commitment that I would like to return and do something working with homeless people and people who'd suffered like this within my own country. And years on, funnily enough, when I came back, I got married, and my wife's from Ireland, and the second night of our honeymoon, we stayed on this estate in the East End of Glasgow with the Franciscans. And people said, "What?" And well, we had this amazing party where all these kids came through, and where they were bigger now, they were young adults and stuff. The way they laid on this party, and I'll never forget that as a memory. But when moving on of how I became involved with DePaul, Mark McGreevy, who you've mentioned, was a trustee for the organisation I work with, which is called CAFOD, which is Caritas England and Wales. He travelled with me when I was running the humanitarian division within CAFOD. And he talked about DePaul and he talked about the homeless. And I listened with fascination. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, perhaps one day I'll work with DePaul because it sounds an incredible organisation. And then I decided just after COVID to start looking for a change. I just felt I was ready to move and work for a different organisation. And this job came up and I applied. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd get the job as Group CEO. And it's been fascinating and I've loved every moment of it and met some incredible people, both working with the daughters who I just adore and the congregational mission who I also adore. It's just been absolutely right for what I wanted in my career. It's tough though. It's really tough. It's not, in some ways people say, well, what is it harder or is it? I think poverty in your own country and poverty in places where there shouldn't be poverty is always really difficult, because it really hurts. When you go to parts of Africa, it's just different. And it's the level of suffering. Suffering is appalling wherever you go. Sometimes coming back where you're seeing it on your own streets and you're seeing poverty where there shouldn't be poverty. There shouldn't be people living on streets and there's a lack of care. And then you're buoyed up by where you see the Vincentian family reaching out and working alongside those people who are so deeply suffering. It's been an extraordinary journey, really, for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that because I think that sense of poverty where it shouldn't be, it's often very difficult to talk about and to work in the midst of wealth and see that the imbalance of wealth in the world when it impacts countries where you look and say there's no reason for someone to be homeless here. There's no reason for this kind of poverty to be there. It's a different way of dealing with it, and it's a different mindset around the people that
Absolutely.
you're working with and trying to also convince that it doesn't need to be this way. Soliciting the help of people becomes a very different conversation around what poverty looks like in different worlds. So tell us about DePaul International. It is a big organization. It crosses the world and is still growing. DePaul USA is one of seven, right? Seven countries that DePaul International is in. My own experience was back in 2012. I think it was 2011 or 12 when I met Chuck Levesque, who was the CEO of DePaul USA at the time, and there was the effort to come to the United States. It was already in Ireland and the UK and moving into other countries, and I had no idea what it was, but it was Vincentian. So that makes a difference, and we can get into some of that. But so DePaul USA follows, of course, the teachings of St. Vincent de Paul. And anyone who's listened to our podcast knows we are Vincentian women. We also are followers of St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louis de Marillac. And that means a very specific way in serving, a specific way of being a leader in the world of service. And so talk about that. What did you find when you what did you find when you came into this Vincentian world? And how has it led you to see homelessness as it exists in the world today? What does that look like for you?
Um, I think just going back throughout my career, there was always a sense of wanting to get closer to the communities I serve, and rather than me stepping out and stepping back in, because that isn't the way I function or the world functions really. And so when I started my career years before, I was an engineer, but the bits I loved most was working with others or training others or running a team of people and being part of a team. And then that moved me into the Red Cross, which is a global family, and that was one step further. And then I moved to working with Caritas, and that was one step further of being part of a community. And so that the move to working within the Vincentian family felt absolutely right, and it was another step because there's a really wonderful integration between faith, community, and those you're working alongside, which is the bit that lifts me up. And like part of your own family, you can go and speak. This is my life, and I think that's what's been really important about why I felt I've fitted in and why my work with DePaul is so important. It's about being that part of community. And the way St. Vincent talked about it in those early stories of setting up the organization, or not setting it up as an organization at that time, but recognizing where the areas of importance are and how you hold on to it and how you work together collectively. And that's a very strong part of the Vincentian family, whether it's with the Daughters or the Congregation of the Mission or SVP, etc. It's the way it all bolts together, and it does function in a very simple way. And I've really enjoyed. I still am inspired by it every day. And the great thing is sometimes I'm really struggling, and I'll phone up one of the daughters and say, "Can I come around for a cup of tea? I really need to have a chat." And I'll go to Carlisle Place in London and sit and have tea with some of the daughters, and I rejuvenated, and I leave and I go back to the daily slog of a difficult world in which we work. And DePaul International, it started off about 35, 40 years ago. Cardinal Basil Hume at that time in the UK recognised there was a growing number of young people living on the streets, and nobody was working with those. There were people working with the homeless, but not working with young people because it was seen as, how do you work with young people? And the daughters, Congregation Mission and SVP and Cardinal Hume came together and created this charity called Depaul, which was just solely working on with young people. And it was at the cutting edge of the early part of the history. Princess Diana had very strong links with Depaul at that time, and you can see images of her where she would come to the night shelters in London voluntarily in the middle of the night just to sit with people who had no homes and just wanted to talk, a bit like those memories of mine, just to listen. These stories have been handed down to her children of what their mother did. Extraordinary work she did in those early years of Depaul. And then we grew from there into Ireland, into the US, into France, into Croatia, into Slovakia, into Ukraine. We've just opened in the last year, or we've been going through a process of developing Depaul Philippines. And in a couple of weeks' time, that will go to our annual assembly for approval that can be signed off. Again, the thing that I've really loved about developing that new relationship with the Filipino community is just what they can bring to us as a global organization. So Depaul International has four key objectives at the moment, which are really clear, which we developed a couple of years ago. One is the service we provide. Service sits right at the very center of what we do, which is born out of Vincentian values. And the services we provide to those who are poor, suffering in the streets. And secondly, our values. Our values, we kept looking at where do the values sit? Do they sit under? Are they the foundation? Are they cross-cutting? They're all those things. That's really important, but we must not let go of our Vincentian values. Those values that Louise and St. Vincent created and shaped, which are so obvious, which are born out of Catholic social teaching and very much part of our foundation. And we don't want to just be a very good homeless charity. We want to be a charity that's rooted in our values. And as you know, that increasingly becomes a greater challenge as the world and faith changes and reshapes. It's really important we hold on to that. So that's why it sits at the center of Depaul International. And that's why we continue to invest, and like with Mark McGreevy, of continually rolling out our values, ethos, and training. And then the third area is around reach. We talk about working to end global homelessness. We don't need to build a structure, but we need to be able to represent and voice what homeless poverty is like. And hence we recognise that we've predominantly been in Europe and North America, but there's an opportunity for us to become more international. So hence the Philippines, and we're also talking with the daughters in Kenya, how we can work together more effectively, looking at the Middle East as well. We've also, very excitingly, many of you will probably know of the Fanbin Homeless Alliance in the 13 Houses project, that Depaul International has just been asked to help oversee that. And so the Fanbin Homeless Alliance has become an integral part of Depaul International with all their international linkages. But the important thing is that the Fanbin Homeless Alliance retains its own identity, because it, again, does extraordinarily well. And I feel very privileged we've been asked to hold on to that and help continue to nurture it and support it in its daily work. And then the fourth area is around voice, what we call voice. How do we speak out on issues of poverty and homelessness? How do we engage better with the UN in terms of their understanding of homelessness? How do we engage with governments? How do we inform our own communities and Catholic communities, for example, of what homelessness is really about and how we're working to address it. So those four core things: service, values, reach, and voice are big drivers.
We hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for part 2 of Matthew Carter from DePaul International. And do leave us a review. Give us a rating of 5 on Apple Podcasts and share this with a friend. We appreciate it. And as always, if you have any prayer requests or any suggestions for interviewees, send it to us at companyofcharity@gmail.com.